Japanese mythology is somehow both the weirdest and most interesting collection of stories and monsters I've ever had the pleasure of learning about. In fact, it's so interesting that it served as inspiration for a lot of different anime and video games that come out of Japan. And thus, Okami was born. The game was released back in 2006, but has since been remastered and ported to every modern console due to its popularity and high praise from both fans and critics alike. To be completely honest, I'm really surprised I've never played the game before. It's got a really unique and beautiful presentation, and its premise of the player taking the role of not just a goddess, but the strongest and most revered god in Shintoism, Amaterasu, is very interesting. Combine that with the game's brush techniques, and you have a game with all the hallmarks of something that seems right up my alley. I can't really know for sure if it's something I'll like without playing it first though, so today I say we have a look at the HD version of Okami and see if it plays as good as it looks. Let's get started. 100 years prior to the start of our story, a human warrior by the name of Nagi successfully killed the 8-headed snake demon Orochi with the aid of the white wolf known as Shiranui. She's reincarnated 100 years later as Okami Amaterasu to fight Orochi again after some moron thinks it's a good idea to undo the seal they put on him so he'd stay dead. Nice going, genius. Your skepticism woke up the 8-headed death snake. I sincerely hope you're happy with yourself. Despite what the game's opening would lead you to believe though, the conflict with the revived Orochi is only one of 3 arcs in the game, and you'll probably finish up with this first one in, I'd say, about 9 to 10 hours. Possibly longer if you do some extra side stuff. And while I do really like this first arc, I have to admit, it is the worst arc of the 3. It starts out pretty slow, but if you've played a lot of RPGs like I have, slow starts very well might be something you're used to. There is one other issue I have with it, but that can wait for a spoiler section. The point here is that I could easily see the opening hours of the game turning some people off from the rest of the experience. Along your journey through the land of Nippon, though, you'll have to recover the 13 brush techniques Ami once possessed. Since dying, they've split from her and have become their own gods and all embody the power of the technique they once were. This brings us to the most interesting mechanic Okami brings to the table, its brush powers. At any point, Ami can bring up a scroll that she can paint on, and with it she can affect reality in a number of different ways. Being the sun god, she can of course change the time to day at any point, but once you find a new brush god, you'll obtain a new ability for puzzle solving and in many cases, combat as well. These other powers can range from the ability to restore broken objects, to healing plants, to even slowing down time. The only ones I have a problem with are Catwalk and the Thunder and Blizzard techniques. Catwalk allows you to make a path on walls you can climb, but only when there's a cat statue around, so its usability is pretty limited. The problem with the Thunder and Blizzard brush techniques is that they're 2 of the last techniques you acquire, and their usability at this point in the game you unlock them is pretty low. Especially Blizzard, what with you getting in the last dungeon of the game. Aside from those 3 though, the other 10 are very useful, especially in the game's side stuff. Ami being a god derives her power from the people's praise and belief of her, so in your travels it's a good idea to see what problems people are facing and help them in any way you can, as solving their problem will net you either some extra items or praise that you can spend to upgrade Ami's health, how much ink she has, as well as her wallet and a mechanic we'll talk about more later, her Astral Pouch. You can also net praise from healing the environment with Bloom by restoring cursed patches of land as well as reviving Sakuya's guardian saplings, though this one is required, dead trees, and even these hidden clovers you can dig up. I gotta say, healing parts of nature and feeding the wildlife has a nice feel to it. It's just really satisfying to see the once cursed land of Nippon spring back to life through your efforts. And I know it's been stated before by plenty of other people before me, but this game really is very pretty. Thanks to its unique and well-done art style, Okami still holds up well visually 18 years later. It also helps that the game is incredibly charming with its sense of humor and just how expressive they managed to make Ami. Since she's a wolf, this little sprite named Isun travels with Ami to sort of serve as her voice for the player, since she can't talk. But even without an actual voice, they managed to say a lot about Ami's personality through facial expressions and the little things she does. One of my favorite scenes from her is when you manage to summon the whale Orca so she and Isun can travel to the Dragon Palace in the game's second arc. But when Ami realizes she's going for a boat ride, she, like an actual dog, gets super excited and tries her hardest to quickly climb into the little boat on Orca's back. And as a dog owner myself, I couldn't help but love this scene. Isun has some nice moments himself, but I could easily understand if he grates on some people. He is a bit of a pervert and makes that fact no secret, and he can even come off as kinda condescending sometimes, if that's the right word. I think he's at his most grating during the second arc with the character of Rao, though. The jokes about her twin peaks were kinda funny at first, with them being made more humorous in one moment thanks to Ami, but it can get a little tiring after a while, and I couldn't help but wish he moved on from it after the sunken ship. I don't dislike Yusen at all, I just wish he was maybe toned down a smidge. The biggest thing that could make or break the game for some people, though, is the combat, cause Okami isn't exactly a challenging game. Now, an important thing to know about me is that it's usually pretty hard to make me not enjoy myself in some capacity when I'm playing a game, regardless of its difficulty. Because of this, I've learned to care more about why a game is easy or hard, rather than its actual level of challenge, and I can't say that Okami is easy for the right reasons. Combat is pretty straightforward. Ami is equipped with one of 3 different divine instruments: reflectors, beads, and glaives. These serve as your basic weapon types and can be equipped as either a main or sub-weapon, with each weapon type having a different effect when equipped as a sub. When fighting any of the game's demons, you can also use your brush techniques in combat to stun an enemy or even open them up for damage in some. The problem I have, though, is twofold. 1, Ami can do insane amounts of damage early on and even at the game's midpoint, especially if you upgrade your weapons with gold dust. This can make dealing with enemies and even some bosses an absolute joke, especially when paired with the second part of the problem, the game design differences between Ami and the other enemies. Now, this is just the way I see it with my weird mind, but I almost feel like Ami and the game's demons were built for 2 different styles of combat. Ami has plenty of depth to her combat capabilities, especially with the extra techniques you can learn at the dojo. These can range from combo extenders to even a dodge move and the ability to mark your territory on enemies to earn more demon fangs. The problem is that the enemies in comparison are very slow, don't do much damage, and I would even argue aren't all that aggressive. With how hard Ami hits and all of the tools at her disposal, it doesn't feel like these guys were even built for this combat system. It's so easy to overpower enemies in this game, and it makes a lot of the extra depth to Ami's abilities kinda pointless, since you'll kill them so fast that you won't even need them. And if you're lacking in damage, the game's exorcism slips can absolutely annihilate an enemy's health. This actually also makes the game's attack and defense boosting items kinda useless too, since, when would you need to use them? Making this worse, though, is the game's Astral Pouch, which, when full, will revive Ami mid-battle to full health, and every time you upgrade it, the pouch gets an extra use. So when maxed out, you get 3 revives per battle. Now, you do need to fill the pouch or pouches again after every death, but negating this is the game's Golden Peaches that you can buy with 15 Demon Fangs, an amount that is easily obtainable, especially by the endgame. Golden Peaches completely fill 1 Astral Pouch when used, so you could easily grind Demon Fangs to buy Golden Peaches with, and because you can have 99 of them, that effectively can give you 100 health bars if you are truly patient enough to grind that much. With how easy the entire experience is, you're unlikely to use the Astral Pouch even once, but having it here negates any ounce of difficulty the game might have had. I still enjoyed my time with the game, regardless of the lack of challenge, but I could very, very easily see this level of ease turning some people off, because yeah, the game is probably easier than it has any right to be. So as a word of warning, we'll be going into spoilers for the rest of the video, so skip to here if you want to avoid that. That being said, let's move on. So, I mentioned earlier how I had one other problem with the game's first story arc, and to anyone who's played the game before, you might have already guessed that the issue happens to be its main villain, Orochi. I tell ya, they really hype this guy up, especially at a later point in the game where it's revealed that he attacked the Celestial Plane and was at one point as strong as the gods themselves. Yet I couldn't help but be very underwhelmed. In reference to the original myth, an important element of the fight is the sake that you use to incapacitate Orochi with. Using it, you first knock out 3 of his heads, and then break the bell on his island so Orochi is damageable. You then fight all of his heads individually, and use the sake to stun said head so you can more easily attack it. Do this 8 times, and bam, you win. So, as you can imagine, the entire process of fighting Orochi is fairly tedious as well as repetitive, and just really disappointing given how strong he supposedly is. His second fight in the game's third arc against true Orochi isn't even that different from his first fight, the exception being his armor is gold now. They claim he's stronger, yet its level of challenge feels no different from the first fight. This is in perfect contrast to the game's second arc, with its main villain Ninetales, though. And to be perfectly honest, for as cool as the fight with Yami is, I think Ryushima Coast is my favorite part of the game, thanks in part to its main threat. First off, I love how Ninetales is quickly set up perfectly as a schemer, with it using the demon Blight to create a sickening mist to plague the capital city's civilians. And with the big twist that the person you knew as Rao was actually a disguised Ninetales that used you in order to get the dark instrument of its power back, the Fox Rods. It sets up something more personal for the player, since unlike Orochi, Ninetales has been an active player in its part of the story and has been sneakily using you the entire time. It helps that Ninetales also has probably my favorite fight in the game. The fight starts pretty strong before it even begins, with Ninetales mimicking the constellations the other brush gods would hide in, which shows a lot about just how much egotistical pride Ninetales has for itself. What's also really cool is that using the power of the Fox Rods, Ninetales can actually block your brush techniques with its own, and just like Ami, it even has its own weapon that it carries on its back, that just so happens to resemble a weapon Ami herself can use. This entire fight just has a really good feel to it, which is something that a lot of bosses in this game do well. Even if the battles themselves are easy, I always find myself having a great time just from how everything feels in context of the story and presentation of the fight. And Ninetales absolutely nails this. I also need to give a special mention to the final fight with Yami. He has a really creative design, and wasn't at all what I would initially think an Emperor of Everlasting Darkness would look like, especially with him being a satanic goldfish dolphin thing piloting the world's most high-tech weaponized hamster ball. The fight itself is really fun and creative with the way it fights, and I love the setting with the fight taking place in what I can only assume to be the Arc of Yamato's control room. And having the entire thing be illuminated by the other brush constellations makes for a very pretty final arena, and his theme, Emperor of Everlasting Darkness, really helps set the tone of the fight. Okami is a game that I can easily see why it still holds a special place in people's hearts today. The game is a classic for very good reason and has a wonderfully unique presentation that no game since has replicated. It's frankly incredibly charming, and I love how much personality they managed to give the character of Amaterasu without her even saying a single word, and while I may have a few problems with him, Isun had himself some pretty good moments too. The game's difficulty could easily be a problem for some people, and I can easily understand why, since for a number of different reasons, the game doesn't feel properly balanced in its combat. But if you're like me and aren't bothered by a game's difficulty, you may very well have a blast despite that. Anyways though, thanks to everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and that you have a nice day.